Order. The meeting has been properly posted, correct? Thank you very much. Do we have anybody signed up to speak? Michelle, nobody? All righty, then we'll be moving on to our discussion. Actually, no, our first action item would be approval of the minutes. We have no minutes to approve because this is our inaugural meeting. So we'll be moving on to our discussion information items. First up is the Family Staff Engagement Survey.
So this evening we have Bill Foster with School Perceptions with us tonight. Several months back, the district partnered with School Perceptions to do some baseline surveying of our staff and our families to kind of get a state of things, see how things in the district are going. And Bill is here tonight to walk us through the results of those surveys.
All right. Well, this is exciting. I'm the first guy to get to be part of this group, so thank you for having me tonight.
Thanks for coming.
My job is to take you through the results of your parent and staff survey. So let's begin. So School Perceptions, we've actually been around since 2002. We're a Wisconsin-based company. We have worked in all 50 states, and we've done many tens of thousands of surveys around the country. As it relates to staff, student, and parent surveys, we also have done more than 850 community surveys for the sake of strategic planning, including working with the School District of Waukesha a few years ago. So I remember being in this room not that long ago. So this report tonight is organized around really the background information that was in the survey, the demographics. We're going to do some analysis. My job tonight is not really to take you through every slide in detail. There's 256 slides in this presentation, so I think I would lose you. But my job tonight is to kind of take you through kind of how it was designed and how it's formatted, and then I think the board either has or will have access to these reports. So the parent survey went out, or family survey went out in March. We had over 3,000 total respondents, or a response rate of about 20%. If you've got good eyes, you can see that we had representation from all schools. So basically the way that the survey worked was when a parent logged in, it branched. So if they could have a child at low elementary, middle school, and the high school. So if they did, they were able to evaluate each site differently. If they only had one child in one school, they only saw these sets of questions once. We obviously also look at grade level of students. That's something we can slice and dice the data by. And also one or more of my children received the following services, so we can also look at subgroups, for instance, those students receiving free and reduced lunch and or special education. We have one question in terms of how I identify as white. We had 80%, Hispanic was at 9%, preferred not to respond was 7%, and so on down the road. And the way this, to think of it kind of, probably for this group, it's a good way to think about it. We create indexes, and we can create a custom index for the School District of Waukesha if you'd like. But what an index is it takes 4 questions or 5 questions and it rolls it into a number. So think about it as the quarterback rating. So when Aaron Rodgers has a 145, it's good. He probably won. If he had a 45, it's probably not so good. Now we don't exactly know what makes that up, but that's a way to kind of aggregate the data to help make sense. So we've got informed, included, educational excellence, and atmosphere. Those are kind of standard indexes for us. Those are your high-level scores. So as you begin to build your plans and deploy your plans and maybe create measurements that you want to see how the district is doing at a high level, this is a way to do that against these indexes. So these are index scores by really grade level. So again, now if you want to go deeper, we can go into each of the grades, first grade, second grade, so on down the road. And you can see the numbers that you're seeing as a simple average based on if everybody would have said strongly agreed, it'd be a 5. If everyone had said strongly disagreed, it'd be a 1. So you can begin to kind of see and begin to look for trends. So I don't want to bore you, but there's a lot of data here. So those are indexes by grades. And then we get into the actual sections of the survey. So when a person or a parent or a family member would take the survey, the first section they would hit is these questions around leadership and communication. So we didn't want to have them answer these every time. This is really at a district level. So the first one, as an example, district administration is doing what it takes to make our district successful. 70% of the respondents either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement and gave us an average of 3.44. So that's a simple average for everyone. And again, as you think about goals for this committee, you might say we want to move that number to a 75% or a 3.6 or a 3.64 or whatever we want to do to begin to measure our growth and measure our success. School board is doing what it takes to make our district successful at 58 and heading in the right direction at 59%.
So I have a question.
Yep.
5 is strongly agree and 4 is agree. What's the 3?
There's no neutral.
Right.
Yeah, so there's no neutral, so you needed to pick a leaning.
Okay.
So it goes 5, 4, 2, 1.
Right.
So there is no neutral choice in the response scale.
So a 3 would be sometimes I agree.
Pardon me?
So a 3 would be sometimes I agree?
There's no 3 weighting.
Right.
Yeah, so you could either be your 4 choices or.
So what way would you take the 3 then?
There is no 3 choice.
Well, we're at 3.06,
Oh, I see.
so what would you take that as? Because you wouldn't take that as an agree at all, correct?
I guess I never thought of it like that.
Well, anytime there's a 3, it would be less than agree, correct?
Well, it's an average of your 4 choices.
Mm-hmm.
So anything, arguably, I guess anything better than a 3 is leaning towards an agreement. Anything less than
Okay.
3 is leaning towards a disagreement.
Okay.
So 3 is the middle of your.
Right,
Yep.
okay.
And then overall, again, this is district level communication. This is a different scale. This is great, good, fair, poor. It's out of 4. So if everybody said we're doing great, we're a 4. If everybody said we're doing poor, we'd be a 1. The district came in at a 3.02. We had one question on how you'd like to receive information. This again is all family or parents, guardians that responded. Emails was by far number 1 at 95%. Automated phone messages were at just better than 2/3, and it drops down after that. The website and parent portal and things like that. 18%. It's kind of interesting if you were to ask the question, are you on Facebook? Probably 60 to 70% of your parents are on Facebook, but less than 20% or 1 out of 5 want to receive communication that way. So it's in some people's mind, it's a different tool. And then we go into the individual school, and I'm not going to go through all your schools, but we thought we'd start with one just to show you. So again, if I was a parent at Banting, I was given these sets of questions. I feel welcome in my child's school. I had 97% of the folks who responded to that school either strongly agreeing or agreeing to that statement, and I came out at a 4.45. And then, so these are the questions that were asked at every school. School provides opportunities for parental involvement. Overall satisfied with how much my child has learned at 92%, and most days my child enjoys going to school. Second group was, and this is, I guess this is not ranked. This is kind of the order and people in which they could respond. Child gets help when they need it, 94%. Have opportunities to provide feedback. I know how to support my child's learning at 94%. If my child breaks a rule, they are treated fairly at 96%. School staff treat my child with dignity and respect, 96%. Overall, my child is able to handle emotional challenges, 92%. High expectations at 90%, and satisfied with our school's efforts to prevent bullying at 81%. Have at least one staff member I feel comfortable contacting when I have an idea or concern, 95%. My child feels safe at school, 95%. School facilities are clean and well kept, 97%. Healthy culture at school, 90%. And update on how my child is doing at school, 95%, and school communications both timely and transparent. And then school teaches with materials that reflect my family's culture and racial background, 87%. So that's kind of the standard set of questions that all parents were asked at each school. So, yes, sir.
So for each school, either in the beginning or the end of these results, Do you have the percentage from that school who took the survey?
So for either at the beginning or the end of each school, do you have the percentage of respondents for that school?
Oh, percent by school.
Yeah, I know in the beginning you kind of showed that, but,
We can certainly calculate it. I don't have that breakdown by school. I know how many total emails we received, but I don't know, I don't have that relationship, but we can certainly get that.
I think that would be very helpful, just to put this in perspective,
So-
you know?
So it'd be response percentage by school.
Right, I mean, because it's nice to see 90-some percent, but if 5% of the people responded, you know,
Right.
it gives you some perspective, I guess, or context.
Context, yep. So again, these are questions that, for each school, the overall amount of homework my child's asked to complete. Here your choices were too much, too little, or just right. That sounds like the cup of porridge. So really what we're, I guess, looking for there is the balance at 3% and 15%. If they're both the same, then arguably you're kind of over the sweet spot. So in this particular case, you could argue that the parents would like a little more rigor or homework at this particular elementary school. Does your child currently participate or plan to participate in any school-sponsored sports or activities? You've got 36% yes, 31% no, 16% don't know, and then 17% my child's too young. What some districts are doing now is they're finding high correlation between participation in these sorts of extracurricular activities and academic performance. So they set a goal and say, we'd like to get, at least maybe at our middle and high school level, 70% or something like that. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure there's opportunities for those kiddos. It's a little bit more difficult at the elementary level, of course. And access to reliable internet outside of school, 98%, with 2% not knowing. And then we go on to the next elementary school. So, unless you want to, I'm assuming you don't want to, but that's the organization of this report. And there's a set of slides for every school in your district from what we received. So, questions on the parent?
Mr. Zenobia?
Could we just randomly pick another school
Sure.
that you have, just to do some comparison? We have to go through all of them, just,
Yeah, which one would you like?
how about Horning? If you,
Horning.
yeah,
All right, is that a,
middle school.
all right. Let's see here. Hatfield Elementary. Morning Middle, here we go. Let's see, from current slide. I can see it. I don't know how to get, I guess I could, it's on slide 100, so I can do it the old-fashioned way. Oh, now I'm stuck. I don't know how to get this to mirror what I'm seeing. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. There we go, let's see. All right. Whoop, there we go. All right. So this is Horning Middle School. Same format, same questions. So you can see, and by the way, elementary schools are always scoring really at the highest. Middle schools are actually tough. It's a tough level for kids. They're going to be lower, and then high schools kind of vacillate depending on the high school. So we're a little bit lower here. We're in the kind of 80 percentile, and the averages drop as a result. Parental involvement drops down to 75%. High expectations, 82. 83%, most days my child enjoys going to school. Healthy culture at 71. Satisfied with schools' efforts to address bullying at 61. And communication, 82. Homework, here we've got actually a stronger argument for more homework. We're up to 62% participation in school-sponsored sports or extracurricular activities. Reliable access to internet is 96, and then we're on to Les Paul. Okay. Any other questions on the parent?
Any questions for Bill? Ms. Piazzik?
Thank you for letting me crash the party. I just do have a quick question about, there was an opportunity for parents to put comments into the survey as well. What happens with those comments?
Did we open for comments? I think they're at the very end. There was
There-
open.
there are
there's
comments,
one, yes. So what we can do is we do a comment theme analysis. We read all the comments. We say, here are the prevailing themes. We have not done that yet here, but we can certainly do that for you.
I think if parents took the time to fill out comments, we really have an obligation
Okay.
to
We can certainly
evaluate
do
those.
that. The one thing that comments are difficult because it's one person, but what we do is we look and say, are there prevailing themes? So if we can find, when we will cut and paste verbatims to say, here are the comments that support that. My challenge is always, if one parent has a brilliant comment and no one else said it, is it a theme? But we'll go through and do that work for you and bring that back. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Could I get all the comments? I know
You
there
certainly
may be
can,
a
yeah.
tremendous amount, but
Yep.
if I could, thank you.
Yep.
I'm just curious too, if your company, over time doing these surveys, can give us a sense of accuracy or, I don't know, error percentage based on the participation? Because it sounded like we had about 20% participation rate, so, to extrapolate that, how accurate can we feel the survey is? I don't know if you can speak to that or not.
Yeah, we can. We have a PhD researcher that can answer that much better than I can. But I think really when people take surveys, they really fall into one of two groups. They had a great experience or they had a negative experience. So those are the folks you're going to attract. What I would say, and what really I've seen work really well for school districts is, and we've got another one in the state who's been using our surveys for 10 years, and if you integrate the data into your planning and then report based on your feedback, we changed this policy, this procedure, this practice, and we've seen participation rates grow every year because now parents realize this is a vehicle we can use to have our voice heard.
Sure.
If you don't do that, then you probably can anticipate, people will take it, but, nothing ever happens, so I'm not going to bother wasting my time anymore. So that's really key for really this group, I guess, as you're forming and thinking about what you're going to do and how you're going to feedback. We asked, we listened, and then we're going to change something. But the other thing is, you can't change everything all at once.
Right.
You can do 1, 2, or 3 things maybe a year, and that's about it. Any other questions on parents?
You're good?
Okay. Let me do this. Okay, now we're up to the staff. So same general format. Oh, am I clicky? Are we syncing? My computer's moving forward, but. Nope. Oh, there we go. Yeah. It healed. All right, so same general format. For the staff, we had 1,122 respondents, or a 46% participation rate, which is better. Same theory here, though. If staff, we actually had one staff we worked with where the district used the data to plan for an August in-service, and one staff member raised their hand and said, well, we didn't realize you're going to use this data. Can we take the survey again? Because we really want to have influence. So same theory applies here, that if you can use this and integrate this into your planning, it will increase response rates. This was a little different. We asked staff to respond in terms of what their position is, so we can look and disaggregate the data by classroom teachers, your ed specialists, those are folks typically certified, supporting education, support staff, which includes your custodials, clerical, your aides and paras at 12%, chose not to answer at 4%, and administration at 3%. And then if you are an ed specialist, what's your position? And also including your current year, how many years have you worked for the district? We really have seen a pretty dramatic difference between really pre-Act 10, post-Act 10 staff, because there was, there's a big change there. So about 39% of your staff have been here more than 10 years, and then the rest of the group were a little newer. At which location do you spend most of your time? And same thing, we've got district-wide analysis. So this is questions that all staff were asked to respond to, same format. First section was called Workday. I feel comfortable sharing input and concerns with my supervisor administrator at 78%. Amount of work I'm asked to do is reasonable is 56. Most days I look forward to going to work at 79. Have healthy relationships with my coworkers at 96. So, and by the way, it is possible to then begin to break this down by school, by position as well. Then I would be here all night, but we've got that capability. But again, this is at a district level. 89% feel safe at work. 94% have access to technology. 93% have the technology I need to do my job. 81% materials and supplies I need. Environment. Next section. Information important to my work is shared with me in a timely and effective manner at 76. In the last year, I received useful feedback to help improve my work at 76. Staff input is valued at 72. Our staff handles student discipline in a consistent manner. By the way, across the state, this is the lowest scoring item, and it's gotten a lot worse over the last couple years. So this is a major concern of staff, is student discipline. Our staff does a good job educating our students, 94%. All students in our school are respected for their values and beliefs, 75. opportunities for training and professional development at 79, and our school student discipline practices are effective. Again, that's the lowest area at 50%. Support. I feel supported by my supervisor and administrator when I make decisions at 87. Pay practices are fair at 54. I'm recognized when I do a good job, 63. Parents and community support the school district at 55. District seeks input from a broad group of staff members, 42. School has a process to ensure every student has a connection with at least one adult in school, 75, and district's heading in the right direction at 33%, so 1 out of 3. All students in our school are given equitable opportunities to learn and experience success. District administration is doing what it takes to make our district successful, and board is doing what it takes at 31%. Schools support students from different diverse backgrounds, 78. Have the training and support to work with students from different backgrounds, 68. And social emotional needs of our students are being met at 48%. We got equitable opportunities for, this is one section where people could respond for students with special needs, it's 79, all genders, 75, different economic backgrounds, 72, cultural backgrounds, 70, and racial backgrounds, 69. And then district-wide breakdowns, these are indexes around academics, engagement, supported student experience, and staff experience. So these are those high-level numbers again, you might want to set goals around. And this breaks down each of those indexes by schools. So this begins to give you some, depending on how you want to look at it, you can look at elementaries, you can look across, and these are all your schools broken out. And again, this is staff input. And then same indexes by position. This data, by the way, would be a lot more exciting next year when you have longitudinal data. You can see changes. And then on a, kind of wrapping it up, if you've got a business background, you might have heard of the Net Promoter question. We've modified that to fit the school setting. So how likely are you to recommend the district to a friend or family member? You're at a 5.66. So again, this is the kind of wrap it all up into one question, one score. And I think that's it on staff. The one thing I would share with you, just insight, across the entire state, all the districts I've worked with, there is not one district that's done surveys over multiple years where this year wasn't lower, and in most cases significantly lower. This was probably the most challenging year that school districts have faced, and I don't know if anyone's surprised by that. I'm looking at your faces, but it's been a tough year. And this is your baseline year. So it's hopefully it'll be better next year.
Any questions for the staff survey? Mark, you got a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this would be helpful or not, but I'm just, as I was looking at the data, I'm wondering if it'd be helpful for us to see elementary schools versus middle schools versus high schools. And I don't know if there's other major categories, but that's,
At a
I don't know.
index level, question level, how would you like to see that? For every item?
Probably, you call them those 4 categories the indexes then?
Those are the indexes. That's kind
Yeah.
of rolling it up. We can also create it whereas for every statement, every,
Yeah, I don't know, it's just a thought I had, so I'm thinking index level, but I don't know if other people have any.
yeah, again,
Thoughts on that?
it's a lot more useful when you can see your growth, or, that'll be more interesting. But we can provide whatever you'd like.
Yeah. I don't know, let me think about that.
Okay,
Corey?
Could we get the comments on these as well?
absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Anthony?
One question, you showed the numbers on the student discipline, and I don't know if you could answer this, maybe it's not a fair question. You said this was a unusually bad year, not only coming back to school, but in that area. Having done these surveys for other districts and seen this data, what is kind of the percentage drop that you've seen this year? If you can even approach that, or is it?
It falls in our statistical world is what we would call significant. So it's probably between 5 and 10% drop on most items, which is significant. So it's pretty much across the board. There's and student discipline has been low, but that one actually, that took a big hit as well. I think especially, you think of kids that, were at home or missed almost, one way or another, missed a couple years of school, then came back. It was difficult for them.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Piasek?
Thank you. Is this an average or a net promoter score?
This is, it's an average based on the Net Promoter Framework.
Okay, I'll follow up with you about that,
Okay.
because there's a difference in the calculation. I just want to make sure that we understand, is
Okay,
it just an average of all the responses?
This is an average of all the responses.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe following up on Mr. Zenobia's question, in other industries, when they do employee engagement surveys, and it sounds like you've done a lot of them, that kind of give that perspective of here's where you fall in terms of the norms in the industry, and here's maybe the best in class. Is that something we can get from you, or?
We can do that, and what I would propose if you were to do that is to wait. We still have some, believe it or not, schools finishing up that are still doing parent and staff surveys right now. But then after July 1st, it would be something we could put together and show you as some comparison data. But right now, you'd be compared to schools last year, which is
Sure.
not a good comparison.
I think that would be helpful,
Okay.
especially since this is the first year
Okay.
doing this. And then my last question is, are the indices that you're calculating here proprietary in some way, or are we able to get all of the data and
You can get all
cut
the
it in
data.
different directions? Okay.
And the other thing what some districts will do is, especially larger districts, if there's something you really want to drill into and say, we're going to have our own index, and whatever you want, you think these are 4 things we really want to write a goal around. Our software allows us to build proprietary or custom indexes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Want to
Thank
do
you.
that.
Any other questions? All righty,
All right.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Next up on discussion information items is special education transition update.
Yeah, thank you. Tonight we have Jason Gahan and the team from the Waukesha Transition Academy. They'll come up and take us through the program and then some service adjustments that they are making in the years ahead.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Sorry about that delay.
That's Right?
A few technical difficulties there. Good evening, and thanks for having us. We're excited to be here tonight to talk about student transition in Waukesha. And oftentimes when we talk about that, it's kind of big, and so one might ask, well, what does that mean? Is it student transition in between buildings? Is it student transition from high school into the workforce? What does that actually mean? So I want to kind of bring some definition to that tonight. For those of you who have either been here for the last few years, few months, or maybe have watched on TV for the last few years, you've heard or read me talk about student transition with the definition of what happens after they leave high school, what happens when they turn 18 and navigate through the years until they turn 21, when they're still have the right to receive a free and appropriate public education. You've also heard me talk and provide some updates regarding the state transition readiness grant that we've been awarded 2 of the last 3 years, and what we've done, what we've earmarked those funds for, as well as how are we doing with our students as DPI defines on indicator 14, which is post-high school outcomes. Within that indicator, it really focuses hard on competitive employment, and there's definitions with that, or higher education, and where are our students going? What are we preparing them for afterwards? But tonight I want to focus on our Transition Academy, which is in fact what are we doing for students between the ages of 18 to 21 in Waukesha. And again, those students all have educational disabilities. Students are qualified to continue on after their 4th year of high school when they have educational IEP goals that have not been satisfied yet. There's still goals that we need to work on in order to improve their skills to allow and increase their success after they leave us. So tonight, we have a little bit of transition going on with our Transition Academy. And I also want to go back to that. So Kathy Miller and Monica Whaley are retiring this year, as you all know. And Teresa Meyer has been within the academy this year. This was her first year, correct? But we also then have Laura Edwards and Sarah Garber, who are coming to the Transition Academy from South High School. And they bring a wealth of experience in working with students to improve their post-high school outcomes. They have spent a great deal of time over the last 2 to 3 months after school hours really looking at what has the Transition Academy laid for the foundation already, and how can we build on that, given the scores, the indicator 14 results, and that's what they're here to discuss tonight. So when we were discussing, a focus for tonight, I told them I want the board to leave tonight to know the what, the how, the why, and the when. Okay.
So as we're moving forward, our vision is to provide authentic learning experiences for our young adults 18 to 21 to increase engagement and independence in the community. So it's how can we establish partnerships within our community to increase the amount of time that these young adults are spending in, not only in work settings, but also in independent living, in social situations, so they can grow their skills to be independent after they leave our building.
So then what we are looking at is what are those 18 to 21-year-old services that we're going to be providing for our students at the Transition Academy. As they're leaving their home high schools, we'll be looking at the transition assessments that they'll be completing. All of the students will have a PTP, which is through DPI, which is completed as part of the IEP process. We're looking for moving from the credits into the services model. The students who are coming to us have all finished the credits that are needed for their high school diploma. So we're now looking at what are those next steps, those transitional steps they need. We'll continue to have those annual IEP meetings for the students, reflecting on their goals, see what they have accomplished in those transitional steps and what still we need to work on. Our team members here will be the WTA staff, as well as the community service providers that will be working with us, and the parents will be still receiving the progress reports throughout the year.
I just want to take a second and define the acronym on the slide. It's something that I'm always cognizant of, especially with our parents. PTP, Post-Secondary Transition Plan. Every one of our students from the age of 14 on, or who will be 14 within the calendar year, are required to have a PTP, and it really focuses in on what do they think they might want to do someday, what are their current skills and what do we need to focus on to allow them to experience success in what they have envisioned for that goal someday. And that could be in higher education, it could be in employment, it could be in independent living skills, it could be any number of those. But that's something that is in place for every one of our students with a disability.
So then, when we look at those transitional services, DPI has given us an outline and the guidance to follow for the transitional services that they would like to see us working on with those 18 to 21-year-old students that we are working with. We'll be looking at some of those job responsibilities, the going into the community, those work-related experiences. Some of that will be done in the classroom, some of that with those different modules we'll be working with as well. We'll be working a lot on those work readiness skills as well. Some of those will be the actual job duties, communication, working with others, and then we'll be focusing on what DPI has aligned here for us, which also is aligned with those PTP services as we mentioned in the earlier slide.
So what does that look like for us? So as Jason mentioned, we have been reviewing IEPs as well as the transition assessments that have been completed, as well as our students' post-secondary transition plans. Based on that, we created an outline of modules that we're going to be offering. Our goal is to have as many of those modules taking place in the community as possible. But based on then that information, whether a student needs independent living, perhaps they need to develop skills around making and creating small meals and budgeting for those small meals. So it would be then taking that group of students that have then on that post-secondary transition plan as well as that transition assessment noted, it would be taking that group and then working on that. So how can we help build those skills to look at the budget, take them into the grocery store, have them do their meal planning, go and participate in grocery shopping, and then coming back to WTA and working in the kitchen and then prepping that meal. Perhaps our students are needing that employment piece. What are those skill areas that we need to grow to get them community ready for employment? Some of our students have no experience in any type of employment within that community. So then how do we build those skills so they're ready for the community employment? So that's that Monday through Thursday time, 8 to 2. We're going to be working on those skills. And then Friday, we're 8 to noon is the students are going to be scheduled with us. In that time in the Friday afternoon, this allows us to start reaching out to our home schools, south, west, north, to begin to bridge for those juniors and seniors and begin making those connections and helping them prepare for then transition to the Transition Academy. So we're looking at a variety of experiences, job tours, doing some coming into the building and offering some classes and work with those schools, as well as then having them come and participate with some of our WTA activities so that they have begun that transition and grown in those community experiences before they come to us.
Just to add a point of clarification, we tend to start each school year with approximately 40 young adults enrolled. And some of them tend to drop off, and the reason that they do drop off is for reasons of success. They've either found permanent employment, they've learned the skills to go off and have that permanent employment, or they, for a variety of reasons, just don't think it's a good fit. But we tend to end the school year a little bit north of 32 young adults in the end.
So, as we're building those job and vocational experiences, this is one area that we're going to be focusing on. We want to create a continuum for students. So as I mentioned before, some of our students have never been engaged in employment. And so we're going to begin with, for some of our young adults that need to build those skills, we have two different work experiences that we're going to be providing in building. One is running our coffee shop, and then the other is working with our school lunch program, which then could lead to some job opportunities with our school lunch programs in our buildings through Aramark. And so it would be helping them develop those skills around customer service, food prep, money handling, all of those things that would help them then begin to build those experiences to transition into adulthood. Also understanding that flexibility, that sometimes things aren't always going to remain the same, and how do we deal with change. Because oftentimes when a routine or something unexpected happens, that can be really confusing and a challenge for our students. So building those skills so that way when they face them in the community, they are ready for it. Then our next phase would be moving them into some different volunteer experiences. We're very fortunate. Waukesha is rich with volunteer opportunities. So we have a number of volunteer experiences that we're going to be partnering with next year, where our young adults then, that would be that next step. Now we have those skills, we're ready to begin practicing in the community. We also have, again, because our district is large and we have great partnerships, we have some students that are going to be participating in co-op. This is a more advanced. Our goal with our co-ops within the school district would be allowing our students to be independent in those. So maybe we would start with a coach going in and working with them, a coach being one of their teachers, and helping them in those beginning, but then we would be phasing out with the goal of them being independent in those co-ops. And then working towards community internships. So these would be working with businesses that we have reached out to. So we have a number of businesses that have agreed to have our students come in. We're looking at 9-week modules or internships for our students where they would go in and they would practice. And they would be working with a goal of then potentially interviewing and then gaining employment at the end of their 9-week session. And then again, our last is independently employed in the community.
Before we move on, I just want to highlight, yes, on the garden level of the White Rock campus, there's a coffee shop. And the coffee shop that is at the garden level of White Rock is largely utilized by the staff and the students of the East Campus. However, there are staff from around the district and other schools, including Lindholm, who do swing past in the morning for a cup of coffee. So please keep note of that and maybe even insert it into your calendars from time to time.
What are the hours?
We're going to be running the coffee shop. Oh my goodness, I had this.
8:30 to 10.
8:30, yes, 8:30 to 10. Thank you.
Yep.
And as mentioned before, some of the skills we're going to be working on inside the building and outside the building are communication skills, food safety and service, customer service, taking inventory, organizing, money handling, cleaning, stocking, sales, office, warehouse. We're also going to be doing bus training on the city bus system, and we're going to be partnering with Independence First and DVR, which is the Department of Vocational Rehab, to do some of the modules. So we're working together with the community on that. The independent living skills that we'll be working on are meal planning, community shopping, laundry, going out to eat, budgeting.
And then as we are also looking at independent living for the community, some of our more recreational activities, we're looking at those, as Laura mentioned, we do have a lot of students that have different levels of independence that we'll be working with. By going out with the community activities gives them the chance to practice those bus skills, being able to navigate in the community, working well with others in the small groups as we're traveling with them to different locations, potentially looking at the zoo, bowling, fishing, hiking, movies, potentially different community classes that are offered as well. As they are looking at those activities, they'll be responsible for their money and paying and budgeting and making changes, as well as any potential changes that might come up along their schedule as we're doing some of these activities. So.
One important area to focus on that is often overlooked is that of rec and leisure. It's assumed that young adults with all abilities know how to use their free time. And that's not simply not the case. So it's important for us to expose young adults to different variety of opportunities, of hobbies, of activities, to learn the skills so that they can employ those independently down the road.
And as Teresa mentioned, really one of our big goals too is to help our parents as well as our young adults engage with community partners. So that way when services end for school at 21, they have a robust network and community connections so they can continue this work past, so that they're not simply at home, but they're engaged in meaningful activities within the community. So we will continue to help our parents connect with resources such as the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, Aging Disability Resource Center, Waukesha County Human Services, just to name a few, as well as Special Olympics. Again, a way for kids to network and connect. So through this work, we have the QR code up there if you want to peruse, but we have expanded a resource site for our families. What this resource site contains is links and information to community partners. It also will be updated each month with community education and resources for families, as well as different activities that they could engage in. So this is going to be available to our families, teachers. It will also be shared out with our high schools and middle schools as well. So that way anyone that might need or be seeking resources, it's a one-stop shop.
And one last note, as I pointed out a few weeks ago in a weekly board update, WTA had a family open house a few weeks back. It was very well attended. A description was provided as to what types of services, such as you heard tonight, were in store for their young adults for next school year, as well as a presentation by one of our DVR counselors, which really provided the parents kind of the timeline and what benefits DVR can provide their son or daughter. And really important to get those resources into the hands of the parents. And looking ahead, that's something that I'd really like for us to continue, is to offer parents the opportunity to come to a school, a comfortable environment for them, to hear about kind of what lies ahead for their son or daughter, to bring those resources in and make them accessible so that they don't have to go out and independently seek them on their own.
Questions? Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. First and foremost, thank you so much for the work you do. It's so tremendously important. I don't need to tell you that, but it is so important that education not only consists of the books and the numbers, but for this population. The work you do day in, day out is vitally important. Thank you. I've got a couple questions. Big question, put you on the spot. How do you assess success? Is there some sort of metric where you look at students once they're out of the academy? Or?
Do you want to talk about after, and I can talk about
I'll start
while
out by
they're there?
saying that the IEP is unique to each and every individual.
Right.
Every young adult and every student in our district with one has individualized goals that we progress monitor. So of utmost importance for our young adults as they transition out of their conventional high school into transition beyond is for us to have appropriate and adequate transition goals in place to begin with, and ones that we can progress monitor. Oftentimes it may be the job, it may be gaining access to higher education, but other times it's growing the skills that we set out to so that they can continue to build upon them in the future.
And so, as Mr. Gahan had mentioned, those skills. And so what we have also been working on is designing rubrics. So we've been taking rubrics that other school districts are currently using for their transition, and then using the best of those rubrics to build our own rubrics. So as the students are going out with the community, whether that be bus training, whether that be a work environment, we can monitor those and monitor the progress. And then it's going to allow us to also fine-tune those goals and really target areas of growth so that we can ensure that those students are successful.
Yes.
Thank you. How does the handoff look like when they transition out of that transition academy to other community services? The nature of my employment, I deal with some of those later services. Is there a formal transition or handoff? And once those students are out of WTA, is there a way to see or assess their level of success? I'm sure there's limits on that, but
Yeah,
I'm just
so
curious.
very good question. A few slides back, we talked about community agencies and resources. Department of Vocational Rehabilitation is certainly one that we really encourage families to begin to explore and to sign up for from really about the age of 16 on, or depending on how many more years of education the student has left. Long-term funding type options. It's something that's routinely talked about with families in IEP meetings. Who do they need to register with, and at what point, at what age of their young adult? Guardianship is another one for families who that comes into play for. So really starting to prep families for life beyond high school, in high school, knowing that they still have up to 7 years left from the time that they're a freshman. Is there a formal handoff where you have completed this and now you're ready for this? No, not exactly. But I believe we do the best. We utilize the IEP with the transition assessments and to make reasonable calculated goals so that we can continue to make those advancements. And that's different, and that's unique for every student, depending on where they are.
You mentioned guardianships. There's guardianships, conservatorships, things like that. Do you have enough contacts in the legal community to point parents and families in that direction?
Do you want to talk about your experience
Yeah.
with your parents?
And I know I'm putting you on the spot, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I've had a number of students whose families have gone through the guardianship process. There are some really rich resources. I know that I have worked very closely with Aging Disability Resource, which was on the slide. They have provided, which you'll find in the resource site, a number of pamphlets, brochure, guidance for young adults as they're going through that process. So we're very lucky to have that resource, and they've shared out those resources. So through that process, it's really connecting them with the community. Oftentimes, families will provide or will obtain their own counsel to help them through that process. They don't need to. Aging Disability Resource Office will work with them and will work with us as we're partnering and working towards that.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Zenobia?
Just generally, I think you alluded to it, Jason, you said, if I caught it right, 40 young adults enter the program every year and about 32 stick? Was that?
And that's a rough number. We
Yeah.
tend to start within the low 40s. I think our highest year, we were at 48, and that was 3 or 4 years ago. Most of them remain, but some successfully exit because of other options, and some exit for other reasons, correct?
And so for those 3 years after high school, how many students are in the program total? Or is it just that 48 you're talking about?
Yeah, so the
Okay.
running, the pretty constant
Roughly.
enrollment tends to be around 40, so that we tend to have approximately 15 exiters and 15 new young adults come in each year.
Okay. And do they take advantage of that full 3 years? Or you said some drop off?
Yeah, in a variety. I don't know specific numbers, but some certainly will benefit from the instruction from what WTA has called the seminar model of instruction. There's still going to be the seminar component where students are learning skills in the classroom and then going in the community to practice and try to generalize those skills. Some complete the first year and then obtain employment. Some maintain 2 years, some maintain all 3, and exit accordingly.
Okay. Thank you.
Raquel?
So, I want to thank each and every one of you for the important work that you are doing. It's very meaningful. And it just, I don't know who else, but it's heartwarming to me because I think that we have to support all of our students regardless of, the backgrounds that they come from. With that being said, I wanted to ask you all, what are some common employers that the students usually go with after they leave? Like, I know sometimes when I walk into like Culver's, for example, I know they have a program for some of the kids, and I love to see them. I try to support them and stuff. So, do you have like any common employers that some students typically go to, or?
I'll start and then you can fill in.
Okay.
Commonly, and again, when I view transition, I'm thinking about the students who complete our 4 years of high school with disabilities and kind of some of the tracks that they're on, and then the tracks that some of our students who continue on into the 18 to 21-year-old program. But to your point, pretty routinely, the grocery stores, the health clubs, the movie theaters, for some students, car dealers who are more attentive to detail. Do you want to add anything to those?
I think that you covered. I know that we've had I've had a few students that through the high school have participated in the auto program. And so the oil change, I've had a number of students that for a variety of the oil change places, they've been able to gain and sustain. I have a few that I see on a regular basis that are working. So.
And I think hospitality in general. We can insert fast food opportunities for those students, as you alluded to, but also some of the intent of the locations that this group has chosen to partner with are areas that we often find success for our students, so let's build upon those.
Mr. Mateo?
Again, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm not asking for an answer now because it's an awkward question. It's been my experience in any group like yours that does the work that you do, that sits in front of a board like ours, will sometimes think, if they only knew this one thing, and if we could only fix this one thing, basically a wish list within reason, an attainable wish. Is there something you can think of that you're not getting or not getting support, or if you could only make the board aware of this one thing? I'm sure there's probably 50, but maybe reach out to the board, myself, let us know. Can't make any promises except we'll listen and try to help. So my comment, I guess it's not a question unless you let it rip if you have one, but okay.
Any other questions or comments? Fantastic presentation. I have a little experience with transition programming. What does the transportation look like? Are the students bused to East? How are they get out in the community? Things like that.
Yeah, all of the above is the answer, and all of the above is we tend to utilize every piece of transportation available with intent as well. So in years past, we have used our first student busing to pick up young adults in the morning to bring them to campus and to drop them back off at the end of the day. Increased attention to what is appropriate for that student. Does the public transportation make more sense for us to pay for their bus fare to come, because that's something that they can independently learn and utilize in life beyond us? We also, through the transition grant, twice now in the last 3 years, have been able to utilize funds to buy vans. So that's something that has allowed us, I guess, the opportunities, the luxury within the school day to go and utilize the community partnerships and resources on our term, on our timeline, and not around a public bus route timeline. We've been allowed to go volunteer, as an example, at Hawes and come back within a time that makes sense for our school schedule instead of when the bus line is running. But we continue to utilize all of them.
Okay, fantastic. Do we have an aspect where, and I have some experience because I had just a great experience in the district that I work in. I helped a couple students get their driver's license. Do we help out with that in the program? Because there's a lot of the students at this level that just need that little extra help to obtain that driver's license. Are we looking at instituting that?
I've connected students with DVR, and then through DVR, they've been able to get support with the class and
behind the wheel
accommodations, and then going forward and getting accommodations when they take their tests. So, and I've had great success with that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, this is really what I call a transition program, because every one of those students that you have are going to transition into something regardless of what it is. And I think that the most important thing that we can do for them is make sure that that transition is meaningful and smooth as we can possibly make it. So the work that you're doing with these students is fantastic, and I'm glad to see that this is the direction that we're going with this transition program. And it really takes into account the word transition, because that's the most important thing when you're dealing with students in this program. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
And
other
we're all
comments?
very excited to get in the community.
I am excited to see you in the community. Email me and your schedules, and I would be more than happy to tag along to make some time to take along with some of the stuff you're doing, because I do that on a daily basis in a different district in the county. So I've been on the bowling trips with.
There you go.
And the movies with the Waukesha Transition Academy. And I recommend any board member who really wants to see what it looks like in the trenches with kids and transition them to a stage in their life that has meaning, go out with the Transition Academies and the transition programs, because it really, it's a job and it's really meaningful work.
Once the schedule is set, late August, perhaps early September, I'll draft the board update and include their schedule. So
Fantastic.
you have knowledge of what's going on with it.
Fantastic. And then just to piggyback on Mr. Montiel's, if you definitely contact me if I can be of help, the program for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All righty. Our next discussion information item is the end of the year student discipline data.
So we will go over the 2021-22 school year data. I'm going to pull up a presentation for you right now. I will be jumping around those so that you can begin to see the numbers. Yes, we saw it in the survey earlier this evening. Student discipline, student behavior is a component of it. We've discussed that at other committee meetings. So what we're doing is we're giving you not necessarily baseline data for us, because we've done work around this for years, but it's going to be baseline data as we transition through the next two presentations tonight, and then kind of talk about what our next steps are going to be as a school system to address this. I just want to remind the board that we do have a full series of policies. It's under the student section. It's in the 5,000s. And we have a number of policies. So if you were wondering, when I reference policy or when we start talking about our policies on student discipline, as you go through, you can see anything under students as it pertains to behavior. And the behavior starts around policy 5500, which begins with our student code of classroom conduct. From a consequence standpoint, you can see academic honesty, dress and grooming, use of motor vehicles. We have policies on hazing, harassment, bullying, disorderly conduct. But we use one policy in particular, and for the board members who've heard our presentations or remember our discussion at the policy committee a few years ago, the disciplinary conduct for disciplinary consequences for student misconduct. And this is our guide whenever we're dealing with student misconduct in the district. This policy has been in place in the district for the best records that I have going back over 20 years. So just for some perspective of the board, it breaks down consequences from a level 1, 2, and 3 perspective. It talks about what we do from pre-expulsion, referrals to the board for expulsion, and then and what some of the expectations are, like what the consequences could include. Our administrators at the school will reference this policy. We do professional development. I'll talk about that shortly with our administration, just to make sure that they are understanding of what this policy is, because we want to maintain consistency within this policy, because this is what the board has told us how they want us to address discipline in school. We do try to have a teaching component to any discipline referral. So from a understanding of how your actions impacted a victim, to peer mediation, to referrals with our school social workers, counselors, psychologists, just depending on who's available. So we try to have a teaching component, and we try to have a consequence component to discipline. And that consequence is, as mentioned before, it could be a parent conference, could just be a discussion with the student, it could be detention, suspension, both in and out of school. And I'll share the data with that with you in a moment. So if I get back to the full screen on this. We do administrative training, as I mentioned. We bring our administrators in the summer to review the policies on student discipline and other policies in the district, such as hiring processes, so on and so forth. Our Director of Student Services, so Luke Pinion, prior to Luke, Sharon Thede, our Directors of Special Education bring principals together twice a year for discipline norming. What we found in a larger system is, in years past, we had inconsistencies as to how consequence would be applied. So we do the first one in the fall of the year, usually in October. We give our principals an opportunity to experience student behavior, student discipline in the school. And then we bring them in and we talk through some of the bigger scenarios or the more unique scenarios with our administration during that. We do that in the spring of the year, the fall of the year, and then we do that again in the spring of the year. As I've talked in the past at this committee, but behavior, and I'll show you a trend line, in the district, it does get predictable during different times of the year. So if you're a parent of a child in the district, you may have gotten a newsletter update from our principals that says, we are starting to notice that playground behavior is getting a little rough. Please talk to your child. These are some things that we're going to do at school. Or we're finding that kids are coming to school late in the morning. Please pay attention to the weather, the excess drop-off time. So we'll do the reminders to families. We do our reminders with administration. And I'll kind of show you those peaks that we experience during the year. We try to be proactive going into those because the reminders that we can do with our staff, with our administration, and the support that we can bring in from our families is very helpful during these times. This is a slide that we present there, and I apologize that it's cluttered, but what you see up there is like the big ones that we will deal with on a regular basis, both from a board policy and an administrative guidelines standpoint. We want to make sure that our principals know how to do an investigation, how to follow up, what are the big ones. When I say the big ones, what are the expellable offenses? What must they do if a student brings drugs to school? What must they do if they find a weapon? So the things, again, we want to maintain that consistency so that our schools are safe, but we also want to make sure that we're uniform in our practices so that we're not unfairly disciplining at one school and not perhaps disciplining enough at another. So we do go through this. We want to make sure that students do have their due process rights so that they have an opportunity to be, if they're accused of something, we do need to interview them. We do need to talk to their parents. We do need to send notification of a suspension home. We want to make sure that we follow those to a T so that we have our parents on board, but then we also give the person who's been accused of something or who did something wrong the opportunity to speak as to what they did. Our data, and feel free to jump in with any questions, but I do have an opportunity for questions at the end. At the end of this year, and I will blow this up, we do look at our data going back every year. We go back over a 4-year period of time. So we don't look at discipline data in an isolated manner. We are trying to see if there's any trends. And as I have met with some board members, we have made some adjustments with things in the past. We broke down things that we thought were not specific enough. So for instance, disruptive behavior. What is disruptive behavior? Disruptive behavior in my classroom could be different than Mr. Montijo's classroom. So we try to get more specific in our discipline coding, and you can see that there are some categories there's no data on in 1819, 1920, 2021, but this year you start to see data. So inappropriate language and/or inappropriate language expression or interaction. For 3 years, you don't see anything, and then this year you see 2,576 office discipline referrals. That was a new category that we added. This isn't a new behavior trend that we're seeing in students, but again, it was in our effort to try to make sure that we had a little bit more specificity with our principals, with our teachers, as to how to go about referring in a category. At the end of the year, our totals, you can see the first category category on there was the 18-19 school year. I would say that that was a school year that was most close to what we had this year from numbers of days of attendance. We didn't have any hybrid models. You can see our numbers were down drastically in the 19-20 school year. That was when schools shut down in March, and we didn't have any face-to-face instruction. And then in the 2021 school year, where you see that we had 6,000 at the secondary level being in the hybrid model. I'm not going to debate how beneficial that was from an instructional standpoint, but from a behavior standpoint, we saw far less behavior. And I'll show you that as we get into major discipline numbers in a couple of minutes here. This is just graphically where we're at. You can see that this year, 21-22, was much higher than we were the past 2 school years. This is the chart, though, that I think is most informative to us. And I apologize that it's a little bit jumbled. But this is the year-by-year, week-by-week breakdown. And I did include this in your packet so that you have a chance to take a look at it on paper. But you can see on a week-by-week basis where we are at when it comes down to office discipline referrals on a year-by-year basis. And so this year, the 21-22 school year, as you can see, it's the one that's coded in orange. What we try to do is proactively address behavior through family engagement, school-wide reminders around different periods of the day. And you can see where we peak. We have generally peaked in and around that time every year. The winter break in the middle of the year, that falls at different times. So you'll see a valley around the 18th week of school. That is during the winter Christmas recess. You can see that the weeks leading into that on a year-by-year basis are generally very high. We tend to see out of our students who come from more challenging home life that their background, or their behavior escalates during this time of the year. So our special education staff, our school counselors, social workers, and psychologists, they're very busy reaching out and trying to work with kids during this time of the year to prevent the behavior. But we've seen it, those numbers represent pre-pandemic, pandemic years, and now post-pandemic. These are trends that we see in our system. You can see that we get to the 24th, 26th week there. You're starting to get into March, February, March. And then you see the numbers come down again, which would be around our spring break time. And then you see them rise leading into the last few weeks of the school year. This is historical. This is something that we plan around, that we work to engage. But we do know that for many of our students, this is a very difficult time of the year. As we have talked about behavior, we also take a look at, this is again is the incident group, but we do also focus then on what are the consequences. We hear this often from people. One of the things, the differences that we've noticed this year is the number of office discipline referrals. While it was down in comparison to the 18-19 school year, our suspension usage was higher. The orange is the out-of-school suspensions. We were about 200 more out-of-school suspensions this year in total, and our in-school suspensions were slightly higher. So from a consequence standpoint, using the full gamut of consequences, from bringing kids in and having a corrective conversation, to a parent conference, to a detention, and then as we get into in-school and out-of-school suspensions, we have been disciplining the students that are coming through our system. The work that we're going to do, and I'll get at the end of the risk ratio presentation, which is next, we'll begin to talk a little bit about what are kids being suspended for, and that's going to be some of the work of the discipline committee is dissecting this data to try to get into the why. Why are we facing a discipline issue? Why have board policies that have served us for many years? Why are we starting to see the behaviors that we're seeing? What are the components to the behavior? We do have the ability, and I'll show you it in a moment, to take a look at the number of kids that have like 2 2 to 3 office discipline referrals, which in our system is about 450, to the number of kids who have 16-plus office discipline referrals, which is 175. As we talked at a T&L meeting a while back, there's a lot of time that goes into an office discipline referral. There's the time to write the referral, that's the teacher's component of it. There's the disruption to the class that perhaps the behavior did. But then there's the time that's missed for the individual student who has been sent to or escorted to the office, who is sitting in the office waiting for the referral to be processed, who then deals with the consequence. And when we start to link, which we'll do in the future, the behavior data with the academic achievement data, we'll get into more board level, committee level presentations on that. You'll start to see the relationship between lots of office discipline referrals and poor student achievement, particularly on the forward exam. And so what do we need to do in order to increase the amount of class time the kids have? And that's been an effort that our schools have really put in, because they know that those missed instructional minutes are having an impact on that individual student outcome, and the strategies that we can employ. The kids who are getting referred multiple times are going through our SST, our student services team, and then a PST, a problem-solving team process. So we are wrapping around those students. This isn't just from a discipline component. There is supportive services that are being provided, but we are, again, running into multiple students over the years that are getting more and more office discipline referrals, and we are really working to try to find solutions to help those kids in school. That is going to be an area of emphasis for us. As we look at major discipline, I just want to refer you back, policy 5600.01, those are the level 3 offenses. So if you ever hear anybody reference major discipline, that gets categorized as what is considered to be an expellable offense: endangering the health and safety of others, possessions of weapon or dangerous articles, setting false alarms or setting fires, chronic insubordination or refusal, criminal charge of battery and/or assault or sexual assault, the use, possession, sale, or distribution of alcohol or any other illegal controlled substance. So these are statutorily linked. These aren't defined solely by the School District of Waukesha. This is what comes to us from the state as far as what we could expel a student for. And then this is when we would introduce the pre-expulsion process, or through special education, the manifestation determination process. And I'll show you those numbers here in a moment. This is the last 5 years for pre-expulsions. This past year, we were the highest over the last 5 years at 118, not too far out of line from where we were in the 17-18, 18-19 school year. Again, you can see where pre-expulsions were very low during the 18-19 year, although I would say that, the 19-20 year, given the fact that we lost the last 3 months of school, and if you go back to that week-by-week student discipline, you could guess that 18-19 would be very representative of where we were. 19-20 would have been where we were at 18-19, 17-18. Luke Pinion, he's the one who conducts the bulk of our pre-expulsions, almost all of them. He did not have his first pre-expulsion until in the 2021 school year. His first pre-expulsion came when we went back to the 5 days a week at the secondary level. So essentially through the first several months of school, we had no pre-expulsions, and then when we came back with all the kids in the school, it started to pick up by the end of the year. Our expulsions over the last several years, we had 14 and 17-18, 15 and 18-19, and then the last 3 are 7, 6, and 5. Through the pre-expulsion, what we're finding is we have a lot of first offense drug possession that leads to a pre-expulsion, first offense drug possession. So students who do bring drugs to school, they get a pre-expulsion, and as you heard Luke present, I believe it was a month or two ago at the Teaching and Learning Committee, that's where we're building in the AODA services for kids. We're putting them on a contract. That contract is good for a period of time where we're monitoring. If the student violates that pre-expulsion contract, they get an automatic trip to the board. for an expulsion, so we do have that process in place. The other offenses that you'll see would be related to either a major fight at school or possession of a weapon or a threat to the school, and I'll have our threat assessment information for you momentarily. Just to provide you with the manifestation determination, a general definition of that, it's a process that an IEP team uses to determine if a student with a disability has a behavior incident, and if that behavior incident is directly related to his or her disability. Through that process, we look at, was the IEP implemented appropriately, and was there a behavior plan in place, so on and so forth. And if we say that it's not a manifestation of the child's disability and the IEP were implemented appropriately, and the behavior rose to the level that we would bring it to the board, we could bring that student to the board for an expulsion or put them on a pre-expulsion contract. So we do follow that process. That is written into IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, so we're bound by this particular piece through federal rules. Our manifestation data over the last 4 school years, again, we had 71 in 18-19, 38 in 19-20. That was the COVID year. 20 last school year was the multiple learning models. Plus, we had a lot of students who elected to do virtual learning during this particular period of time. And then this past school year, it was up to 61. It does represent, though, it's important to note, and I did put up there, that it's the number of meetings that we had. It's not necessarily the number of students. So we've had, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you mid-sentence, but regarding the manifestation data and then the meetings, I understand that. Do you have an idea, number-wise, of what percentage or what number of those meetings resulted in a manifestation determination that the behavior was, I don't know the term, but as a result of the IEP-related?
I don't have an exact percentage. I mean, I would say it's a fair percentage of them result in a manifestation. So a student, for instance, who has an emotional behavioral disability comes to school and, falls into that category of repeated refusal, or it falls into the category of gets into a fight, substantial fight, or brings drugs to school. As you go through that process, more often than not, and it's not all the time, but more often than not, you're finding that the disability is the reason that the behavior is there. And that's through, those meetings consist of special education teacher, general education teacher, school psychologist, building level administrator, so an assistant principal or principal, and then Amanda Mack or Jason Gahan attend those meetings as well, and they go through that as a team thing. It's not an automatic, though. Not every manifestation meeting results in it being a manifestation of the child's disability. So not 100%, but there's a fair percentage that are.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, and just to finish that sentence, we do have a number of students who have had multiple manifestation determination meetings this year. There are some kids that we're serving that have a lot of behavioral need, and we're working with them through placement at a traditional Waukesha school or an alternative placement within the district or an alternative placement out of the district. So we're using the full service array that we have to try to serve kids, but sometimes that still doesn't remedy the behavior issue. Bullying investigations. So we are required to report to the board our numbers of bullying and threat assessment, our data, year-end results. What I want to point out to the committee, because we hear a lot about bullying, and so we do have board policy on bullying. I think I listed it here as far as a number goes, 5517.01. And what we did, as we tried to break out and determine what is bullying and what is not bullying, because we have an obligation to investigate all complaints of bullying, we broke the policy out into the actual complaint and findings. And so if a report of bullying comes in, we interview both the person who is making the complaint and then the person who is accused. We bring in the evidence. We bring in witnesses to the bullying. We look at the policy, and this is what the policy requires that we do. Was the behavior deliberate or intentional? Was the intention to cause fear, intimidation, or harm? Is there an imbalance of power? And was this behavior repeated? So we have given our schools guidance as to how to go about investigating bullying, and this is directly related to what the board policy is, and the board policy is directly aligned to what the state and the DPI have said we must do in any instance of bullying. So I just want to be clear that each of the numbers that I share with you tonight has gone through this process to determine was it bullying or was it not bullying? And so I'll get into the bullying numbers with you.
So who's filling out that form?
It's the school administrator, the building principal, or the assistant principal, and they're working with their student services team, so the psych, social worker, counselor. They are taking witness statements from the kids who were involved. They're taking a statement from the parent who is making the complaint, and they're going through to determine if it was in fact bullying.
So if someone reports bullying, whether it's a student, I guess anybody, to a staff member, administrator, teacher, educator, they have to complete these forms?
Every complaint of bullying is investigated this way. So if a student notifies their classroom teacher that they're being bullied, this then goes to the principal, and the principal goes through the process.
Okay.
This is different, for instance, than, say, mandatory reporting.
Right.
Where if a classroom teacher is told that I'm being abused, or this is what's happening, they're the ones that are obligated to make the report. This is something that we pass off to the administration for investigation.
But the teachers, everybody knows that if they get a complaint, they have to push it.
Absolutely. This is talked about regularly at all of our schools. This isn't something that's, addressed once a year.
Right.
People know that this is what the expectation is.
Okay, very good, thank you.
So school by school, you can see on the screen, we have the number of allegations in one column, the number that have been classified as bullying, and the number that have been not classified as bullying. So again, using that template that I shared with you, the investigation process. At the elementary level, we had 33 investigations. 7 were classified as bullying, and 25 were classified as not bullying. At the secondary level, we had 17 allegations, 12 were classified as bullying, 5 were classified as not bullying. It's important to note that this is a different process than if somebody were to claim harassment. I just want to make that very clear. These are not numbers as it would pertain to harassment. These are numbers pertain to bullying. And this is what has been, go ahead.
Sorry, so Waukesha North had one bullying complaint in the 2021-2022 school year?
Yes.
No kidding. My guess is that is being underreported?
I
don't know. I'm not asking.
This is the numbers, these are the numbers, principals know that this is data that's being collected.
Okay.
We do multiple collections over the course of the year, multiple reminders.
Okay.
And then this is what has been reported out to us as an end of the year number.
Okay. There's a whole nother discussion surrounding that, and I'm not imputing anybody, I'm just saying these numbers don't seem to match up with what my understanding of high school is, or recollection is.
Well, and when you start to look at what's being reported, now, this doesn't take out single action.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't take out inappropriate behavior.
Right.
I mean, if I go up to you and approach you in a manner one time, is that bullying or was that inappropriate conduct? Was that student misconduct?
Right.
If you and I get into a fight, is that bullying or is that categorized as a fight? And in the data that you see before, you can see fight data.
Right.
You can see inappropriate conduct, you can see inappropriate language. But as you go through and ask the questions, is there an imbalance of power? Is this repeated? Was it done to, threaten, put in fear? What we're finding when we do the investigations or when kids report behavior, we're not finding an imbalance of power. We're not finding that it was to instill fear or whatever with somebody. It's an actual just conflict between two students.
Right.
And that's how it's being reported.
And that's a hugely important distinction. I just want to highlight that too, because I think it was the fourth question on that, which you just mentioned, was repeated. And I think that without thinking it too deeply, most people just say bullying can be a single incident. And it can be the beginning of bullying, but it has to meet those 4 definitions.
We had a good discussion about this.
Repeated could be yes or no, so it doesn't have to be repeatedly bullying.
It doesn't have to be repeated
Okay.
because you can get into what is the intent. But we had a good discussion at Dr. Siebert's parent advisory group on this, I forget what month it was, December, January, somewhere in there, I think. As the parents talked, the parents were sharing that this is I believe they categorize it as an overused term because a lot of inappropriate student behavior people are presenting it as bullying. It's the term that people are familiar with. And I'm not minimizing the impact that bullying can have, but we have an obligation to make sure that we're investigating it as it pertains to the policies that we have in the district, and we're making sure that we're reporting it accordingly. It is a sliver of what we're dealing with from a student discipline standpoint, as the other, materials showed. But it is a piece that we do take seriously. And it is teased out from harassment, and I have to emphasize that because harassment follows the Office of Civil Rights processes, because harassment is going to fall into an effort at a protected class. Whereas bullying, it can just be any two students who are interacting in the district.
Got it. Thank you.
I guess then just to follow up to that, from how you characterize this, Dr. Cook, it sounds like we have the harassment numbers would be greater than the bullying numbers.
I'd have to pull those out right now. I think that they are similar to the bullying numbers as far as the total number that we've dealt with.
Okay.
But if you put the two together, the numbers would be higher.
Okay. The other question would be in regards to this would be, when we have incidents between students, are we finding that there are multiple incidents between the same students or the same groups of students that, if you put them all together, would be like, hey, this is maybe, I know the definition is, people have different interpretations of what it is, as we've stated, but is there anything there that would suggest that what might be characterized as bullying, is a series of incidents that have occurred between students or groups of students?
What we find is that there's an ongoing disagreement, beef that kids will have with each other that either starts in school or starts in the community, carries over in both environments, and we end up dealing with student misconduct in the schools. Those claims can sometimes start as a result of my child is being bullied. But when we bring the kids in and when we talk about it and when we look at the behavior history, we're finding that the kids are picking on each other mutually. They're fighting with each other mutually. They're doing you're not seeing an imbalance of power, and you're not seeing any particular kid being targeted in an imbalanced way. If you were to think about bullying, like the kid who's on the playground, who is not associating with any friends, who people are throwing the ball at, calling names, picking on them for the shoes that they're wearing, you're seeing those things investigated through this process, because that would be the bullying. What gets teased out in these discussions is Mr. Montillo and I live in the same neighborhood, and we just generally don't like each other. And it starts with us getting into a fight at the basketball court, and then a fight on the bus, and then a fight at school, and then a fight on the playground, and then that's the stuff that we're dealing with more regularly, and it oftentimes is starting outside of school, and it's trickling into school.
So would it be fair to say that, this form is to identify, that student that is being picked on and maybe isn't the type to retaliate, per se, as we're talking about, but this form is helping us catch those situations where a student who's not going to defend themselves or retaliate is going to be protected, so to speak, by, that's kind of general, but I'm just...
Right, we want to be able to tease out
kind of the aim of what we're going for.
Right, we want to make sure that we're teasing out what is true bullying and that we're intervening appropriately so that it doesn't continue. That's the biggest thing for us to do. We want to make sure that the student who is determined to be the bully in the case has an appropriate intervention from a disciplinary standpoint, but also from a supportive standpoint, because there's something going on that kid thinks that what they're doing is okay. And then we want to be able to work with the victim of bullying We want to be able to pull that student in, have them work with their school counselor, work with their classroom teacher, make sure that we put additional eyes on the situation so that if we start to see something happen at recess, we start to see happen in the hallway, whatever it might be, so that there's support in place so that the person who's doing the bullying knows that they're not going to get away with it, and that the kid who's being bullied knows that they're being supported in school. That's the reason why we have a detailed process in place.
Couple of hopefully quick questions. Are you done? Sorry. Go ahead.
I had just one more. It was just, how many of these instances are, obviously the ones that occur here on school grounds somewhere, but how much either are what we would call cyberbullying or happening on a phone or an iPad or something that we may or may not know about that don't happen here? Are we catching any of those, or are those reported?
If it's happening outside of school and it starts to trickle into school, we are dealing with situations of the social media stuff.
Okay.
I say this half in jest, if we could take all the cell phones at the door and get rid of them, or if you wanted to put an age limit on the purchase of something or the possession of something, the cell phone, I think, would be the single biggest thing that I'd advocate for. And it has completely changed how administrators have to address student discipline. It's another layer that we end up having to deal with. It's very complex to try to sort out, what's happening. Like, what's the nexus to school? How do we go about determining if this is related to school? Because the social media is a 24/7 thing. And we often deal with the words and actions that happen on social media. They manifest in some sort of behavior thing that we're dealing with in school.
Mm-hmm.
The cell phone, particularly the smartphone with all the social media and all the apps, that is a big problem that a handle needs to be made on that, and that goes far beyond just what school is.
Again, I have another question here.
Go ahead, yeah.
Do we limit that at all now? At any age level, any grade?
Well, from a social media standpoint, like the iPads that kids have the messaging features disabled. So on our platform, we put a control on.
But I mean, for any student bringing a device to school, we don't limit that in any way.
It's one of those things that has gotten to the point where to try to police that. East High School, a couple years ago, went to a Yonder pouch, which is a little pouch that has a magnetic closure. It locks down during the day. It was very well received by the kids. They have to go to the office to get the thing unlocked if they need to make a phone call. That has helped control usage during the day. Our high schools this past year put these caddies in, kind of imagine like an old behind-the-door shoe hanger that, kids have put their phones in going into the classrooms. That addresses usage, but that phone is there and present all the time. And that does lend itself to, well, I mean, we see it with adults, we see it with kids. It's that dialogue that happens on those phones does trickle into school.
Thank you.
Just real quick, in the investigation or the filling out of this form, if it's determined that bullying is not the issue, do they ask enough to determine what is the issue? And then can redirect or?
Yeah, so.
Like harassment or?
So if we're finding that it's, as it relates to a protected class, if somebody comes forward with my kid's being bullied and we start to look at the why, if it starts to go towards a protected class, we'll go down the road of harassment, discrimination, and then there's the process and the policy that we follow in order to do that. Sharon Thede and I are the compliance officers. People reach out to us, we go through that policy point by point, and then and do an investigation of those things that way. If it's not bullying, but it's still student misconduct, then we will discipline and support accordingly after that.
Okay. And it could be dual, obviously, if they're both.
Right. And just to add to this discussion, what we find is the kids are giving each other a hard time. And when I say a hard time, like what friends would do to each other, like that picking and teasing on between friends. But it'll either go too far or somebody will, take that a certain way. And then we're dealing with the consequences of that as well in school. All of those things start to roll in school. The general ribbing of each other can lead into fights or student misconduct in school.
Okay, and then just a quick clarification on harassment. So that is only for protected classes?
That would fall into a definite protected class, yes.
So then if it's not bullying and it's not a protected class, a student who's not in that it would just be what, student misconduct, or?
It could be, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no definitive on any of it, but the harassment would fall into a protected class layer. And we can go through that, I can have that agendized at a future meeting, and we could talk about what that means. Yep, got time at the end for, okay. So threat assessment, I did include the protocol in the update. That's going to take us to the wrong link. I apologize for that. But in the update, it is very lengthy. This is what was put out by the Department of Justice when we did the safety grant and the safety grant work a few years ago. And that they came about that as a result of what happened down in Parkland. So it's a three-part process, a three-phase process that we use. So when I show you the threat assessment data, know that this process has been used to investigate all of the threat assessments that we have done in the school district this year. And again, this is something that we're required to report out to you as a board, and I thought that it fit well into this evening. So school by school, at the elementary level, you can see that we have the number of threat assessments completed. And we would do a threat assessment if a student brought a weapon to school with intent to harm something, made a general threat. We would do a threat assessment if a kid made a general comment on, I'm going to shoot up the school, or I'm going to bring a bomb to school. We go through that, this process with all of these. We categorize them as low risk, and you can see that as a result of that protocol, medium risk or high risk. And at the elementary level, we did 29 assessments. 24 of them were low risk, 5 of them were medium risk. Then at the secondary level, we did 20 of them. 15 were low risk, 4 were medium risk, and 1 was high risk.
Could you scroll up just a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
And so again, based off of what was reported to us, when you start getting into low, medium, or high risk, that would trigger one of the disciplinary consequences that we would have. So from a suspension, in school, out of school suspension, pre-expulsion, recommendation to the board, again, based off of what the level of threat was and the time of it, but it would also look at like what supportive systems do we need to be in place. When we do these threat assessments, we're activating our school resource officers. We're bringing them into the fold. We are ruling out what, for instance, access to weapons a student would have at home. Police are visiting homes when these are done. And then we're looking at what we need to do within the school environment to keep the school environment safe. We do have periodic training with the Department of Justice, the ones that put this together. We did a district-wide training, I want to say it was going into the 2019-20 school year, and we have revisited that training since. So, got any questions?
Thanks, Joe. This is very interesting. What is the timeline that the threat assessment is done? Like, how fast does that happen?
We do intermediary measures. So if I was the one who made the school threat and it was brought to the attention, we would do like an initial discipline component to that. That might be 5-day suspension. And then within that 5-day period of time, we would go through and do the threat assessment. We begin those, I guess, we begin, when the dust settles, we get the initial complaint, we determine an immediate level of safety, we issue the discipline, we begin that investigation then right after that. The threat assessment is a very detailed process where we are looking at information from teachers, counselors, getting information from families, taking the time to interview the student, looking at the past disciplinary record, working with our SROs. So we start it right away, but because of like the level of the threat with that 5-day suspension and the kid being out of school, we will use that time to make sure we do a thorough job. Another component of this is if there is a school threat, law enforcement gets involved with that. We are reaching out to the police, and we work with the police with all of these things. So they're looking at it from, was there any criminal thing violated? And oftentimes we're finding that there is some level of law enforcement follow-up, either a ticket or something more severe than that, and the kids are being addressed accordingly there. So we try to take that two-pronged approach from a school safety standpoint, use the process then to make sure we really try to figure out what level of threat we're dealing with and go forward from there. And again, like we talked about before with bullying and stuff like that, the social media layer of this is often one of the trickier things. Kid will do something on Snapchat, put something on TikTok, and somebody finds it, parent looks at it, sees it, parent reports it. So we deal with that as well.
So in the moment or in the course of a school day, if someone reports something through the anonymous system.
Speak up, speak out, yep.
Through that, or I know that when things are happening in the moment, people are engaged immediately, but how is the speak up, speak out data reflected in what's here, or how's that handled daily?
The speak up, speak out, there's a layer of filter that they do with stuff. So that component goes right to the speak up, speak out folks. I think they're through the Department of Justice. They'll look at it as, is this a immediate need? And then when it's an immediate need, self-harm, threat, credible based off of what their initial assessment is, they'll notify law enforcement, school administration, district administration, and we get involved with it immediately. And when I say immediately, I've had phone calls at midnight, I've had phone calls at 1 o'clock. We begin that work with law enforcement immediately to make sure that the school environment is safe. There's a layer of filter. We then, as a school system, take a look at that. Now, sometimes it's not a threat. Sometimes what's being said is, you can report anything anonymously through that system. So these are the things that we have looked at and begun the investigation on. That could be speak up, speak out. That could be a concerned parent. That could be a concerned student. That could just be something that was overheard in the hallway. A kid made a stupid comment, and now we're dealing with and we dealt with a little bit of that at the end of the school year. We're dealing with a stupid comment that was threatening in nature, and now we're doing the process, and the kid is being addressed disciplinarily.
I want to go back to the beginning of the presentation about when you talked about like minor discipline issues, not the major ones, but the minor ones, and looking at the data. I wonder, is there any are the teachers being provided with enough training or routines and procedures on how to work with students from diverse backgrounds when it comes to behavior and creating that culture of high expectations and staying consistent with them. I know in my first year of teaching, the reason why I may have had behavior problems is because I wasn't consistent with my routines and procedures. So that created a segue for behavior to some of that to happen on my own end. So now, I know you use the example of the playground. So like for example, being in a playground, you have a student, that's misbehaving, whatever, and you've modeled for them what the appropriate way of behaving on the playground looks like. Is there training on how to help that teacher to maybe correct that student's behavior? For example, for me, if I have a student misbehaving on the playground as a teacher myself, after I've showed them, after my routines and procedures of the first 2 weeks of school, then we're going to have a little talk, and I'm going to say, okay, I've showed you what's the appropriate way of behaving, so while the other kids are playing, we can keep modeling and practicing until you get it right and staying consistent with it until they meet my expectations. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, so we do provide school-level training, mentoring, support for new teachers and for teachers who are struggling. Our teachers meet at the grade level, and there's a layer of, behavior, student discipline discussion that happens there. Each of our schools has a SST team, the Student Services team, which is generally the principal, the coach, the counselor, psych, social worker, where they're starting to look at discipline trends across the school.
Yeah.
Where are we seeing more office discipline referrals? Is there an approach that we need to take? We do that often at the beginning of the school year, and the thing that comes to mind is generally bus behavior. We'll work with the students who are riding buses or a bus on acceptable bus behavior. And I don't know why buses just popped into my mind, but that is one area where we do provide that level of training. For students who are rising to a level where we need additional, they will go through our PST process. It's the problem-solving team. We are seeing, Joe's behavior is escalating generally right before lunch and right after lunch. What intervention do we need to put in place in order to support him? And then we'll do behavior plans for students who are, this is non-special ed, but kids who need a check-in, check-out procedure. They need the extra behavior support, the outreach from the family. So we do that on the front end to try to curb behavior. You did mention consistency, and we do run into situations where in the hustle and bustle, where sometimes you're not running into that. I think one of the layers that we have experienced over the last couple of years is the impact that COVID had, not so much just from the shutdown, but from the learning models that we went to the infusion of substitute teachers into the mix. I mean, subs are great, and they provide a great service for us, but it's different than the general routine. So we'll notice that, the substitute teacher deals with more negative behavior. When we start to have subs in the school, our principals are going around the school and they're checking in with them, they're making sure that they're supported. But there's a lot of factors that go into student discipline. I'll talk a little bit more after the next presentation about what we're going to do with the committee that's going to help address some of the things that you just mentioned.
Any further questions? No? Okay. Nothing further, I guess.
All right.
Moving on
Moving on.
to the risk ratio review.
The risk ratio. In I think it was the April or May Teaching and Learning Committee, Amy Riebel did a presentation on the risk ratio. And I'm not looking at it right now from an academic standpoint. I don't have any updated academic data to present to you, but I just wanted to carry that forward and give you an end-of-year snapshot as to where we were at with the risk ratio data. So our system has used the DPI risk ratio to take a look at where we're at as it pertains to their definition, the RTI PBIS network. So it looks at the risk of students of color compared to their white peers in school. And this is one tool that we have used and looked at in recent years to see where we're at. We have KPI on this, and this is the instrument that we used. When we look at it from a data standpoint, here's our end-of-year data. And so what this looks at, I have to move, I apologize for that header there. Let me make that full screen. Should give us a little bit more room. What we're looking at is the total school enrollment. I just want you to refresh your memories on this. And then we break it down by the number of students that are in each subgroup as defined by the Department of Public Instruction. So 7,547 white students, 716 black students, 23 American Indian, 2,894 Hispanic, 392 Asian, 17 Pacific Island, and then 568 students who identify with two or more of these categories. When you fill this chart in, all the numbers in the white category get set to 1. So when you look at suspension, expulsion, office discipline referrals, that's the group that you're comparing to. That then is set at the 1. And then based off of the number of students who received an office discipline referral, you're looking at then how much more likely, what's the risk that this student faces to receive office discipline referrals in our system. So in this category, if we were to look at the comparison between our white students and our black, the risk ratio is essentially 4 to 1. The 4 times more likely for a black student to receive an office discipline referral than a white student. If we look at that from a suspension standpoint, 5 times as likely to be suspended from school. I'm just going to put the caveat out there. I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in the expulsion data right now, only because we only had 5 expulsions this year, so the pool is so very small that the numbers are easily skewed in one direction or another. When we go back to the presentation then, I just break this out graphically for you so you can take a look at that. This is for the office discipline referrals. This is for suspension. This is for expulsion. Expulsion's a category, so I'm reporting out on it, but again, it's 5 kids. And then this is where we get into the next steps, what I want you to understand from the last 2 presentations. In August, this summer, our district-wide discipline committee is going to come together. We're going to study, analyze, and develop a plan to address the discipline issues in the district. We're going to bring teachers, student services staff, building administration, and district administration to the table to look at and try to find out the why behind this. We'll probably find a lot of whys. We'll find a lot of areas that we need to focus on. We do use the WISE Dash tool to dig into data, so I want you to know that we can look at office discipline referrals by the time of day. So how many referrals are being written between 7 in the morning and 8 in the morning, the number of discipline referrals that we see over the lunch period, the number of discipline referrals we see at the end of the day, how many referrals are coming in from the bus, and then we're going to create a plan to begin to address that. The purpose of our committee, it's going to be ongoing. We're going to break the school year out into 3s. I know that there's urgency to do this, but we want to make sure that we do it right. So we're going to take the first 3 months to dig into the whys, because I think we really need to take a look at the data. We can break that data down by school. And we have schools that like for instance, middle schools, and we heard from in our first presentation tonight, middle schools are generally a very trying time, a difficult time. But we've got a lot of office discipline referrals that are filled out at our middle school level. Nearly 5,000 of the 13,000 are coming from the middle school level. So how do we need to intervene at the middle school level? We have office discipline referrals that happen in the middle of the school day. Like, why are those things happening in the middle of the day? We've made adjustments to the high school lunch going into next school year. So this year it was a 1-hour period. Last year it was a 1-hour period. Next year it's going to be 2 30-minute periods. So 30 minutes for lunch, 30 minutes for instruction. Will we see at the high school level office discipline referrals reduce as a result of that? We will be making by March, it's my goal, it'll be the committee's goal, to have a recommendation as to the approach that we use. And there's several. One of them is PBIS, I mentioned it before, positive school-wide behavior interventions and support. So to what Mr. Moore was saying, you're working with students to address, if you're demonstrating behavior, what are we doing to try to teach that behavior? And for kids that are struggling more, what's the next level of that? How are we checking in with those kids on a day-to-day basis? And how are we incentivizing behavior change? And so really working on the proactive strategies that we're doing to teach behavior, because we do need to teach the behavioral expectations in a school. We've talked about this for a number of years, both at TNL whole board and now at Student Services. And behavior, math, reading, writing, those are all comparable skills. And when you see our ODR levels, we have to build that time in to teach what the proactive behavior is. Part of that is relationship development. How are we connecting to our kids? How are we connecting to our parents? What are we doing early in the process to address negative behavior instead of waiting for it to get to a major situation? How are we reaching out to parents to set the stage at the beginning of the school year? How are we supporting the student, both from the home front and the school front? How are we partnering for the kid who's starting to develop the challenging behavior? And the more work we do at this, at the elementary levels, the more I believe we're going to continue to carry that forward through the secondaries. So that's going to be the ebbs and flows of the work. We hope to have, a lot of voices at the table. I mean, if all of our schools are represented in the manner that they were a few years ago when we did this, We had a discipline committee that ran for 2 years, a couple of years ago. If we have that same representation, I think we're going to have a really good product at the end and really good, solid recommendations. And then in the years ahead, it's going to be developing the staff, prioritizing this work alongside of our literacy work and our math work, so that we can universally address behavior and discipline across our systems. There are some schools that have a lot of work and a lot of urgent work to do immediately. There are some schools that, as we talk about this, they're just not seeing the same problems as other places are, seeing this as the same issue. Not that we don't need to teach behavior, not that we don't need to provide intervention there, but there are going to be some places that need to be prioritized over others. Questions?
So, I guess from looking at this, I appreciate that you want to do your due diligence and get something very solid going in and through the next school year. I would say, though, there's got to be some things that can be, how much consensus you can get, how much administration would have to do this summer to start getting a better handle on this situation. You know, what does that look like? Is that, I think it's doable, in my opinion, but I think it's doable. The level is, to what extent can this be addressed so that it doesn't affect academics going into the next school year like it probably has? I mean, I know we're coming into a really bad year here, but I guess what I'm saying is I would like to see, you know, some skeleton plan put into effect this summer that we can start to institute changes to get a handle on behavior. If that's, you know.
We'll be working with our administration this summer to figure out what they're doing at their school right now and what is working and what isn't working. If we don't have a large amount of consensus around what the schools are going to do, it will not work as it pertains to discipline. Because the individual classroom teacher needs to buy into it. The whole third grade needs to buy into it. The whole first grade needs to buy into it. And in order to get there, we need to hear what is going on at their schools. And what, there are some schools that will say they have 5 kids that are accounting for the vast majority of their office discipline referrals. That is something that is relatively easy for us to plan around. Making sure that our counselors are aware of that at the beginning of the school year, that our teachers are aware of that at the beginning of the school year, that our principals are aware of that at the beginning of the school year. We can make an individual plan for an individual student. There are some schools that are referring kids for many different things that we need to tease out. Is it office managed or is it classroom managed behavior? And to Mr. Moore's point, what are we doing to set the classroom up for success? That is work that we have to have our staff here and present for to try to address it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, because like you said, classroom managed, because I want to make sure that, you know, teachers are, you know, understanding what can be managed in the classroom. You know, like I said, when I was a first year teacher, you know, I would always rely on my administrators for a lot of things that really, as I became more effective in my practice, that is it an administrative problem or is it a classroom management problem? So making sure that, you know, is there some form, like you said, in the summer where not only your administrators get support, but teachers get support. That way on day one, they set those routines and expectations up. They create the culture in their school. Because if we don't create the culture for our kids, they're going to create it for us. So, and it's important that we start strong on day one. If, for example, if I'm at a middle school in the district, you know, 6th graders, I'm going to show you what transitions look like in the hallway. You know, voices should be off. You know, we should not be running in the hallway. And we're going to practice this until we get it right. If it's kindergarten, I'm going to show you what's the proper way to be quiet in the hallway. Hands should be to your side, voices should be off, and things like that. So just showing, I guess, teachers and also giving them the professional development and the support they need to enhance that culture and start it, because what we don't want to do is start off the school year like Mr. Zenobia said and then behaviors just trickle down. So, like I said, start strong on day one, and I guarantee you we'll end strong on the last day as well.
Well, and I would say that we do what you're proposing with like the PBIS basics, the level 0 in the hallway, we're going to transition from classroom to classroom. What we begin to see in our weekly data that I presented earlier shows it is as the school year moves forward, we see, I guess, less attention to that, and then we start to see some problems. Or we see inconsistencies as it pertains to levels of illness, because school by school, as we make transitions from our regular staff to substitute teachers or whatever it might be, we begin to see that data start to tick up. And that level of consistency from a student attendance standpoint, which is another thing that we're going to be working on and trying to come down with, because for years we've averaged about 95, 96%. This past year, for the bulk of the year, we were at about 90% attendance rate. So when we start to peel back those layers, that's, I think, where some of our work is going to be. How consistent to the process? How much are we celebrating our successes? How many times are we adjusting our plans as the student need requires us to address those plans? So that it's not that behavior hasn't been addressed and common expectations haven't been addressed. It all has been. It's sticking with that plan over the course of the entire school year. We had one school this year, Butler Middle School, where the 8th graders were the only ones who had any history at Butler Middle School. The 6th graders last year were at Blair, and the 5th graders, the 6th graders, this year 7th graders were at Blair a year before, so they had a 1-grade level school. And then the 5th graders all transitioned in. Well, when talking to our principals for years, 6th graders generally are the squirreliest at the middle school, just like 9th graders are at the high school. Well, now you've got essentially 2 grades that are brand new, and Butler Middle School saw a lot of office discipline referrals this year, and one of the things that they felt was because the kids are just not used to the process and the expectations that are at the school. So we had a bit of a transition there. Hording Middle School saw a lot of office discipline referrals this year. But many of the discipline referrals, many of them, they weren't all office, many of them were minor referrals. So they were the minor referrals that we're tracking in the system, that the teachers are noting a kid's behavior so that we know what we need to do and intervene on, but it wasn't falling into the category of the majors. There were plenty of majors, but there was a difference between the two. Our high schools are really operating off of strictly a major discipline referral, and we saw relative consistency between North and South and fewer at West High School, which has been our historic trends. So we're looking at that data. We do have plans, we have initial plans, but we know we need to get further along with that. And if we do get to a place, we have to have a universal approach to this, because that does help when we do our open choice for kids, when kids move across town. Those common expectations that we would have help with all of those transitions that our kids are experiencing as a result of external forces versus just what's happening in the regular school day.
Any other questions? Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. Just one brief comment. Regarding that discipline committee, I like it, you're getting to the why. I respect and like that you want to get the data. It's obviously important. You figure out what where the ground lies. And you're going to have teachers, student services, staff, building administrators, and district administrators. I assume this is the case, but please make it heavily teacher-focused. They're there. They see it. They know, we all speak with teachers, what they see on a daily basis. They're going to be the boots on the ground as far as what are they seeing and why, and the best solutions.
The committee, the flow of the committee, there's going to be a large group, but there's going to be the expectation that the small work is going to happen at the school level. The small group work is going to happen. So we're going to take the work from the big committee. It's going to go back with the principal, the teacher, the student services representative from the school.
Okay.
They're going to be working with their staff. So the feedback that we're going to get is going to be school-based. We're going to hear from the teaching staff as to how this is going and what suggestions they have. And we're going to use this large group as, kind of a developmental team for the whole district, but we are going to have a lot of teacher representation at the school level and then reported back out to the team. This survey that was just presented tonight is going to be a data point that we're going to continue to monitor in the future, because we would hope to start to see that discipline, those discipline questions, the student behavior components, we would hope to see improvement in that as a result of this work.
this probably goes without saying, but there's a natural reluctance of people who are, the hierarchy of organizations. I have seen it in other organizations. I've seen it sometimes in the school district where teachers are involved in committees, sessions, and I'm just not hearing anything, or very, very little. I'm trying to read faces. What I've done in other organizations, and I assume you're doing this, I'm talking to the greater public, if we could make it crystal clear that comments are not going to come with any retribution, it should be free-flowing, it should be brutal, it should be no holds barred, let it rip. So they feel encouraged, and if not prodded, to speak up.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, we did have a committee in place for a couple of years.
Right.
And we did go through this. And at that committee, there was definite, very direct and candid conversations around what the needs were.
Good.
And that committee wrestled with, where do we go? Why does our data look the way that it looks?
Okay.
You know, when you look at the risk ratio, they looked at the risk ratio. Why are we seeing that there are 4 and 5 times as many suspensions or office discipline referrals for our black students and our white students? Why is that happening? And they really started to peel that layer back, and all schools were represented, and we had strong voice from a lot of schools, and there was a lot of good reflection among our administrators and from our teachers who were there. So we will get to that place again.
Excellent.
Let's say if I could just make a comment about that. If you had the risk ratio for ODR, like you mentioned, you had that up earlier. If I were to oversimplify that issue, it's because roughly 2 out of 3, maybe as much as 70% of black kids grow up in a home without their biological father. And it's a fact. I can give you all kinds of data on that. For white kids, I think it's roughly 1 out of 4. It's been a while since I looked at it. Hispanics, I think it's maybe 1 out of 3 or so. It might be as much as 40%, but I know we can't fix society's ills. Markel? But, maybe, I don't know what our limitations of the district are, but is there a way to engage the fathers in some way? You have to answer that now, but just...
We are going to look at family engagement. We've done, Patty Hobble, who's not here tonight, she's our Director of Special Ed. She's done phenomenal work over the last several years around family engagement in special ed, and we're going to use that model to engage our families. But it's always important for us to remember that we get the kids at 7 o'clock in the morning at the secondary level and 8 o'clock in the morning at the elementary level, and we get them to 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's the part of the day that we have to fill in and make sure we do a really good job with, regardless of what's happening outside. That's the part of the thing that we have our hands on and control, and we will do a good job in that spot.
Just to piggyback off Mr. Browski and you, Dr. Cook, I would say, yes, with when we're working with different students, I think that, yes, Mr. Browski's right, that, about our black kids, I'm one of them, but I also think that what made a difference in my life sitting right here is the teachers who stood in the classroom had the highest expectations for what I could do, despite those circumstances. So I think it's important that, again, the ongoing training with teachers, making sure that, they're going to hold all these kids accountable for the behavior. They're going to model what the expectation is. They're going to set that high culture of high expectations in the classroom, in the school, regardless of where these kids come from, because we know that when high expectations are high for kids, they will meet them. I taught in Milwaukee Public Schools. I've taught urban kids in Beloit, Milwaukee, and now I'm in Racine, and I think that no matter where I go, a lot of those kids, have, fathers may not be in a home, or, some of those kids may have, difficult circumstances, but the main ingredient and the main focus is that every day I'm sitting in front of them, regardless of what their circumstances are, I'm making sure that, these are my expectations, and I love you enough to meet them, and I'm going to stay consistent with my expectations until you meet them. And like I said, just supporting the teachers and giving the administration support so that they can support the teacher, and helping those teachers stay consistent when working with urban kids. So, for example, if a teacher say, these are my rules, routines, and procedures, the administrator need to help that teacher, follow through them. You said the first week that, you want the kids at a level 0 during transition. It's the second week now. See that your kids are not at a level 0 during transition. So, what are you going to do to redirect them to get them back on track to pay attention and improve and maximize instruction time? So, different things like that. Those strategies, those skills to make sure that, all students are getting what they need in reducing the behavior. I think it starts with, like you said, support from admin down to the teachers and professional development, so.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Cook. Next up is the school safety update process.
Yep. If you give me 1 second, I will see if I can find. There we go. Given the events around our country the last several weeks of the school year, I just wanted to let the committee and the board know that we do engage in school safety planning every year, and it follows a year-round cycle. So for whatever happens in the country, I just go through the slides and, certainly ask me questions when we're done. But just some background. In 2014, the board approved our crisis response plan. That plan was put together with public and private schools in the area, the Waukesha Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, the Fire Department, and then other representatives as we needed to reach out to them to get information. And so we have a very comprehensive plan that is reviewed annually with our school administration and our teachers so that people know how to operate within the scope of the district, should we have an emergency. In January of 15, then we implemented the board-approved plan. So we brought our administration in and we trained school by school what the expectations were around that plan. 15 and beyond, then we began this annual review process. In March of 18, we applied for and received the Department of Justice school safety grants. As a part of that grant, it required that we had 10% of our teaching staff trained in trauma-informed care, trauma-informed schools. We made sure that all of our staff we had 10% trained in that, and then we trained all of our staff in trauma-informed care around the district. We took a hybrid approach of DPI recommended resources and some of our own resources, and we did ongoing training with all of our staff. So everybody was there, everybody heard about it, and we continued that over multiple school years. From November of 18 to June of 21, we designed and completed the construction to address the perimeter of our schools. This was part of the referendum, the school safety component of it. And then annually, we reach out to our principals, and we're doing that right now, around feedback around our school safety plan. So our principals will look at the drills that we conducted, they'll look at the procedures that we used, they'll look at the issues that we faced this school year, and they will reach out to us then, and Michelle sent it out a few weeks ago. We're getting the feedback on those plans now. This summer then, we will meet with our team, so we'll do this end of the year review on the drills. We'll conduct environmental security studies of our schools, so our principals and our law enforcement representative assigned to those schools, either our SRO or our adopt a school officer, with our custodians, we'll walk around the school and they'll be looking at line of sight issues that we face, issues with like the sidewalk, is the sidewalk safe, just the physical stuff that we would need to make sure that we pay attention to and review annually. We're going to be convening a meeting this summer with the district, the police, the sheriff's department, and the fire department to review our crisis response protocols. I just had a meeting with the police last week where we began the preliminary discussions around that. They'll bring their best perspective on it. We'll bring our perspective on it. We'll take a look at the resources that we've studied. And then August, we'll report to the committee on the status of the plan and then any recommended changes. So if we find that we need to make any adjustments to what we do based off of events around the country and events in the district, we will bring those recommendations to you. Those are not just school district recommendations. Those will be recommendations from our law enforcement and our fire partners. I just want to be very clear that we don't look at this in isolation by ourselves. We are bringing people in to help us with that. And then if approved at this committee, those recommended changes would go to our principals and then the appropriate staff that would be responsible for those changes. So we are accustomed to this as a school district. So this is a process that we reviewed. So when I talk to you about like an August time, people are prepared for that. They're ready for if an adjustment is needed. If you remember back to, I think it was October this year, we took those recommended changes to the Finance and Facilities Committee, because that took, it took the items from the former Board Safety and Security Committee. So we had a Board Safety and Security Committee that dissolved. Those items went to F&F, and that's where that presentation was made this past year at F&F, and then now it'll come over to the Student Services Committee. So we have treated September as School Safety Month in the district, so we run through all of our drills, talk with our students, talk with our staff, communicate with our parents as to what we did, why we did it. Just so you know, that fire drills are monthly. We have to do a fire drill every month. The kids are in session, including summer school. We have to do 2 weather drills every year. Those would be the tornado drills or other weather-type emergencies. Then we have to do 2 safety drills every month. I want to make it clear that we do use our safety procedures for a variety of things in the district. So in addition to just conducting the drills, we will use our secure hold when we have a medical emergency in the school. And so kids are kept in the classrooms, the hallways are cleared, teaching happens as usual. We'll use a lockout drill occasionally through the year if there's an event in the community. Not necessarily related to the school, but if there's a suspect on the loose in a neighborhood, we'll lock the school down, and then we'll go off of what the police recommend if the guy is caught, and so on and so forth. And the expectation is that whenever we do these drills or use these procedures, we're communicating the why. So if you're, as parents, you may have gotten a message that, our school is put on a secure hold because of a medical emergency. We try to get that out as soon as possible after the drill, as soon as practicable after the drill, or after the use of it. So we use these things regularly so that the kids know the ebbs and flows and the teachers know the ebbs and flows of these procedures in our school. Any questions?
Questions? Mrs. Zenobia?
Just one real general question, I suppose. How often does the crisis response plan get enacted during the course of a year?
From a drill standpoint through an actual event, many times over the course of the year. Our crisis response plan talks about what we would do in the event of an emergency. So what we would do in the event of a threat to the school location or a dangerous situation, so a lockout, a secure hold, whatever it might be. And I just mentioned, we use that for that. But we also have incorporated into that, like the supportive things. So we have how we're going to help kids after an event. And in that crisis response plan, we talk about building in supportive services for kids, and that could be after the death of a parent. Or that could be after the Waukesha parade, where we have to do the ongoing support. So we include those resources for our teachers, for our student services staff. We'll send those resources to families. It just depends on what is going on. Like after Uvalde, we communicated, like, your kids might, be experiencing grief. Here are some resources to talk to grief. All of that started with this crisis response plan. Uvalde is something that I think hits all of us because, we think about that, as kids go to school, but it doesn't have the direct impact on us that the people in Uvalde would have experienced when the event was happening. So it is a very comprehensive plan.
And my point at getting at that was just, in addition to many drills that we do, we have some real actual plans that we would enact, that we go through the motions and react to it throughout the course of the school year. So these safety drills and such are on the forefront, it seems, in the minds of administration, principals, teachers, everyone.
Yes.
Frequently.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. I know you and I discussed this, and we've been discussing this for months, but for those watching, if anybody is watching, I see this as basically a kind of a bifurcated issue. One is, what's our plan going to be? What's the best plan possible? Use our police partners, fire partners, everything you just talked about, which is fantastic. The other part of the process is, if something happened, will it work? Best way to check that is, if something has happened, did it work? And I'm referring to the South incident, and we've talked about that. And just for those people watching, you've kept me updated. That's been It's something that is going to be dealt with in detail, I believe, next week in an executive session to review what happened, how those policies and practices worked, and then any opportunities for changing. So I just want people to know that we're doing both things. We're not only trying to put the best plan together, but also seeing, is the plan we have truly the best, because did it work? If I misstated that in any way, correct me.
No, like I said, we review our plan annually. We've reviewed our plan after major incidents. We've enhanced our plan as we've, since 2014 when we implemented it. It's been revised, not substantially, because it was well-developed on the front end, but each situation has required us to look at things differently. So yeah, I mean, it's fluid. The best plans, sometimes, just the best plans get you thinking about what you need to do, but there's no good blueprint to deal with every situation. Every situation teaches us a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, we are in a constant state of review of this.
Perfect.
We take feedback from the teachers, we take feedback from the student services staff, we take feedback from principals. Some of it is isolated. One of the additions to the plan a few years ago was how do we address large events?
Right.
The football game, the basketball game, graduation, like what would we need to do? What would we need to announce? So we've built plans in for that. That wasn't part of our original thinking because we didn't even know what the original plan would look like. So it has been added on, and it's something that we learn from each time we need to use it.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Excellent, fantastic presentation. All righty.
Thank you.
Next up, recommendation for future meetings. Does anybody have a recommendation for a future meeting? Mr. Montiel.
I do. Again, kind of going down that bifurcation of process regarding discipline, similar comments, different subject to school safety. We're trying to fix discipline best we can. It's like trying to fix homelessness or poverty. You're not going to stop it. But what I'm trying to look at too is I'd like to get a focus or at least a review of the processes in place that when discipline rises to a certain level, and what level is that, where a teacher makes a decision if they have that ability to say the student needs to leave the classroom, because we can do everything we can possible to try to stop that behavior, which results in this discipline coming down. But if the behavior is not stopped and discipline doesn't stop behavior or prevent it, we still have a classroom full of students and teachers trying to be educated, trying to teach. So at some point, I'd like to see what is the process, that escalation of behavior where a teacher, if they don't have the authority, my position is they should, to say, that's enough, you're out. And there should be immediate, as possible, removal of that student so the education can continue. So that may be well established, I assume it is. I would like a review of that, if we could.
So I would ask that if we do that, you would let the discipline committee begin to do its work, because one of the components is what is classroom managed, and we need to sort that out with our teachers, and what is office managed. We need to sort that out with our teachers and our principals, because for a student who's going through the system, we'll use a secondary schedule, for instance. If in first period they're demonstrating a behavior that is acceptable to the teacher, and second period they demonstrate a similar behavior that's acceptable to the teacher, but in third period, if the teacher doesn't want to deal with that behavior, for the first 2 periods of the day they've been set up to fail, and then they're getting booted out of the third period class because there's no level of norming that's happened between what's teacher managed and what's office managed. And I think that that is one of the things that we face as a system, and that's one of the things that you work through when you do this discipline work, is you try to create as many consistencies as you can for kids, because that level of predictability from one classroom to the next allows for a higher level of success. And if the teachers create those expectations, a 6th grade team, a 7th grade team, an 8th grade team, if they create that and they own that, the students who are going through that educational experience will be that much more successful because there's consistency across each period of the day. If we do that on a case-by-case basis with 1,000 staff, we're going to run into inconsistencies where if anything that I report to you would not be the universal norm across the system until we've had that conversation with our staff. Some grade level teams have done that already, some schools have done that work already, some haven't. And that's where that is some of the biggest staff culture work that we need to do, is to understand what is classroom managed versus what is office managed.
Do teachers have the authority to remove a student from class?
A teacher can write any student up at any time and send them out of their class. What they're doing in that referral is they're deferring then the discipline to the principal.
Right.
And for a teacher who has good relationships with their kids and has good management over their class, the only referrals that are coming out of that class are the major things I think that you're referring to.
Right.
But for a teacher who doesn't, and doesn't have the relationships and doesn't have the processes in the classroom, they could be referring out for any number of minor things, thus creating an inconsistency for the kids, and then you're seeing a lot of office discipline referrals. So that's one of the things that we're going to be doing with that committee, is trying to understand school by school, grade level by grade level, because you could get it to the grade level.
Right.
Because those are the teachers, those are the ones that the kids are experiencing, those teachers. If you could get it to that level where we have some consistency, I could give you a better answer to that in the future.
That answers my question. Okay, thank you.
Is your question, do we have any consistency from grade level to grade level, school to school? Is that what you're?
Well, I call it bracketing. You know, what are we doing right now?
Right.
Where do we want to be? And yeah, in that large bracket is there consistency?
Yep.
Yes. And I guess we're saying we need to look into that.
We need to get to consistency.
Yeah, no, there is no consistency.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay.
That's
yeah.
the goal of the committee, correct?
That's one of the committee goals.
So that, say somebody goes from Rose Glen to Hatfield, the expectations are the same on the discipline, whether it's administrative or classroom. That's what the committee is for. Right now, there is none.
Right. And I understand education is not a flow chart, but in my mind, it's a flow chart of boom, boom, boom. At least it's for,
Right.
That's how I initially think of it, as far as classroom discipline. So, yeah.
So you're okay talking about after the committee does some of their work?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
excellent. Mrs. Zenobia?
So, this discussion is kind of where I felt in beginning the committee and having that committee do a diligent work to get us to a place we haven't been to before, I see that as that goal. But in the short term, I think we just stated that there's a uniform issue. Can we get any type of a handle on that during the summer, and when school year begin to institute some basic things? I mean, to your example of, the first period, some kid may get away with something, and then that's not acceptable further in the day. Well, if that's really going on, then if we had an understanding at the beginning of the day, this is what it is, we would be better served. I know these are great generalizations, but what I'm trying to get to is, if we want to tackle discipline and begin to do something, I would say sooner than later. And that's,
And as I mentioned,
as best we can, I know.
we will be working with our administrators this summer on what are some of those key areas after we review the data. School A, you need to focus on the lunch period, because this last year and the years before, we've noticed that the 10:30 in the morning to 1 PM time when lunches are occurring, you're seeing a lot of referrals during that time. So what's the intervention that you're going to put into place? But I don't know necessarily what that intervention is going to be, but that's going to be a place. We're going to notice that there's a lot of issues around profanity at one school. You need to work with your parents in that community to understand, because that issue isn't uniform, and that's one of the challenges. If in my prior school systems, where you had 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school, well, it was pretty easy to get consensus because you were working with 5 principals. But we have 3 high schools that are serving 3 unique school communities. We have 3 traditional middle schools and a STEM middle school. And so what we need to get to is the level of practice at the classroom, the hallway level, and that's where the work's going to happen. What we'll do this summer is we will make sure that the principals are abundantly aware of when their issues are happening and what type of issues that are happening. And if they work with their school teams, which they will do going into the school year, you'll see that addressed. And we'll also find, though, in our review, that you're going to see some kids that have 100-plus office discipline referrals. You'll find, and so how skewed is the data at some locations, because you have 2 or 3 high flyers, but the rest of the school is not the issue. And it's going to be very important for us to understand, I think, in the future, as we talk about discipline, we have a universal need to build in practices But we do not have a universal system where every place is having substantial discipline issues. And we have to be very cognizant of where we go about allocating resources and providing intervention, because if we try to take a blanket approach, which in some areas will be appropriate, we'll dilute the resources that we have, and we won't be able to help the locations that really, really have a need.
Sure.
Similar to how we would approach reading. We'd put more reading interventionists in a location where you have more kids that are in that bottom 25th percentile in literacy. We want to make sure that if we're looking at those schools that are in the top 10% of office discipline referrals or top 20%, that we're allocating the appropriate resources and approach there to help deal with the kids.
So are there any future recommendations for committee meetings? Good one. Anything? If any pop into your head, email me and Mr. Cook, and we will get them on the agenda. All right, that concludes our meeting, correct? That is the end of the agenda. Thank you all for coming. Our next meeting is, when is our next meeting, Joe?
It'll be the third Tuesday in July.
Third Tuesday in July in this room. So ad hoc is kind of a misnomer. It's going to be a monthly, yes. Yes, so I don't want you to all see that ad hoc after your committee and think you're going to do this once a year. It's not going to happen. Thank you. Yeah, it was really